This is Right from the Deep.
I'm Karen Ball.
And I'm Erin Taylor Young. And this is the podcast from writers for writers, answering the question,
why am I doing this?
Right. As writers, editors,
and a former literary agent,
we're in the deep with you,
encouraging you and equipping you to find your truest story in the deep places.
Get our show notes and more, including a free audio download on how to safeguard your writer's heart at rightfromthedeep.com.
Hey guys, here's what's happening at Right from the Deep. First of all, thank you to all our patrons on Patreon. You help make this podcast possible. If any of you out there want to add your support, feel free and visit Patreon, patreon.com/rightfromthedeep. We'd sure appreciate it.
And thank you so much to our May sponsor of the month, Priscilla Sharrow. Thank you, Priscilla. She's working on a memoir called Bonked, Life, Love, and Laughter with Traumatic Brain Injury. And that's going to release with Redemption Press. And you can learn more about Priscilla at her website. It's PriscillaSharrow.com, PriscillaSharrow.com. And you can follow her blog for the TBI/PTSD community. Thank you, Priscilla.
And it's my turn to share a wonder. I was going through my photos and videos, just trying to clean things out. And I came across a video that I had transferred to my computer from my dad's computer after he passed. And actually, it was an audio, not a video. And it was a recording of him and a gentleman that was a good friend of his singing the song Follow Me. It was a recording from, I don't know, probably the 70s. And as I listened to it and then posted it on Facebook, if you want to go listen to it, but as I listened to it, I closed my eyes and it was like, I was right there. I was with Dad and Roy Aubrey and I could see them singing. And it was like having Dad back just for a moment. And it was amazing to me how things can trigger within us not just a memory, but the true sense of a presence. And in the same way, if we look around us, things that we see and smell and feel can trigger a sense and an awareness of God's presence. He is in everything. And if we just keep our eyes and our senses open to Him, we will know that. We will see evidence of that in every day. And that's a wonder to me.
Amen.
And now,
here's the show. Welcome, listeners. We are glad that you are here in the deep with us. And today we are continuing our conversation with Karen Stiller. Join us. And now, Karen, you did mention grief. Let's go there because you had said before when we were doing some emails that you had to complete this book during a season of grief. First, how in the world did you do that? How did that affect you and the book?
Yeah, I've been thinking so much about that because sometimes I think over the last year and a bit and think, I don't know how I did it either sometimes, and yet I do. So my husband had a kidney transplant, which should, for most people, is a routine. You know, it changes your life, but it's not a thing that will kill you. But that did happen with my husband. He experienced a very severe and rare side effect of post-transplant lymphoma. And he went into the hospital on like the end of November, and he was dead by mid-January. He never came home again.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, it was very unexpected. And the way he experienced lymphoma was on his brain. And so it was a rocky path. As anybody who has loved anyone into heaven with brain cancer, I guess it's probably different for lots of people, but it was hard, very hard. So I had written up till then, like when I signed my book contract, I immediately set up a writing schedule. So it was I signed in July and I was going to do 3 chapters by the end of July, 2 by the end of August, 1 by the end of September, October, November, December, and the book's due in January. And I had built-in revision, so I felt really confident that I'm a big like I make lists and I make schedules and I that's the way I get things done. I love a deadline. So anyway, when Brent went into the hospital, I think I was around chapter 8. I just obviously set the book aside, and after he died, I you know I actually there was a time where I thought I'm never going to write again. Like
Mhm.
I just wanted to I just couldn't imagine. I couldn't imagine a way forward in many things, but I also thought what would I ever how will I ever find the desire or ability to write again? And then, my agent knocked on my door at some point. The timelines are a bit off for me. I can't quite it's all a big blur in some ways, but she basically said if you can finish the book, by a certain date, we can get back on the same timeline. Editing will be shortened, but there's no pressure. And my publisher was amazing, and it said we'll take the book whenever. So yeah, they were of course wonderful. And during that season, they had sent a bouquet of flowers once, and I remember theirs was the only one I carried upstairs to my bedroom. And I think now that there's those flowers were like a symbol of hope for me that, there is a little dot of light off in the distance. If I can keep that alive. And so I was off my day job as like an editor and podcast stuff and all that for about 3 months. And I just slowly picked up the book again and thought, can I? And I dipped my toes in. And what I found was that writing a few mornings a week gave me a shape to the sort of endless days and weeks I was in. And it kind of woke me up a little bit, and it gave me, a sense of purpose, which I had lost. And it changed the book because, I would be interested to hear from listeners who maybe would have made a different choice or have thoughts on this or have gone through this. But my husband was very much part of my writing, obviously in The Minister's Wife, but again in Holiness here. He was very much part of my formation as a follower of Christ. And so I'd quote him throughout the book, or I'd tell a little story about something that happened in our church that involved him. And all of a sudden, he died. And
Yeah.
I
Well,
didn't know how to handle that as a writer in terms of the actual material. And so I talked to a few people, and I had in my head uh, I don't know if people have heard this writing advice, but write from your scars, not your wounds.
right.
And I thought, well, I'm bleeding. Like I am deeply wounded, and but yet I can't not write about this huge thing. And I felt like it would not have been honest. We were talking about honesty to finish those last chapters without telling sketching out a little bit of what had happened. And I was very, this has been a big knock for me. I'd love to say that I've just, been a conqueror in Christ through this, but no, I, I am, pulling apart what it means to trust God, and, realizing that maybe I did think some things that weren't true.
Mm.
Even though I never would have thought that, because my husband was very, why me? Why not me? Like he had a very
Right.
robust,
Right.
sound theology of suffering, which I thought I believed too. And then when he died, a very hard death, I just couldn't believe it. I
Right.
just couldn't believe it. So I felt like I can't finish this book about holiness honestly without tackling that. And so I wrote a chapter called Sorrow. And I wrote it very carefully because I knew I was writing from my wound. Um, and so I kept, as a beginning writer who would get an assignment from an editor, I would often write the angle on a post-it note and stick it, on my computer wall so that I would stick to my assignment. And I had a post-it note in my mind where I was like, your assignment is holiness. Your assignment is not writing a book about grief. Your assignment is holiness.
Mm.
And so, where is the holy in this horrible mess? And so I kept my lens tightly in on that. And it was good for me. It was good for me to write that. And I offered to show it to all my children. Only my eldest son, accepted the invitation, and because I just wanted their blessing. And he thought it was honoring to his dad and what we had gone through, and so that made me feel comfortable. And I trust the editors. That's where would we be without people telling us hard and wonderful things, right?
Right,
So I
right.
I submit it, my work, to the process. And yeah, and I also knew, like, it is a privilege to have a book contract, and my husband would have kicked my butt if he had if he knew I had let it float away and that I couldn't finish it. And I knew last year when I was doing this work that this year I would be glad I had done it. So there was a discipline there, actually, like, which we have to have as writers, right? We know a working writer knows how to work.
Yeah.
And that woke me up. That woke me up. And I also thought, if I was a chef, I would be cooking. If I was a painter, I'd be painting. If I was a baker, I'd be baking. I'm a writer, and I'm
Right.
writing.
Wow.
Right.
Well, that was a lot to have to deal with. I mean, in a
Sorry.
no, that was
don't
Okay.
apologize.
no, but that's good.
It was a long answer.
It was a lot
No,
for
it was
you
great.
to wade through and trying to
Mhm.
deal with that. I think your process was amazing. Just the notion of using that, holiness as a lens, because writers go through all
Mhm.
Right.
kinds of things in their
Yeah.
lives as they're trying to write something. And, not always as awful and
Mhm.
traumatic as losing a spouse, but if we
Right.
were able to realize that there is something to be said for just the discipline and the lens and trying to turn this book in, even though this and this is happening, because our lives may always be this
Mm.
and this, and it doesn't mean that we're not supposed to
Right.
Yeah.
write. It just means we're supposed to be learning how to work through that.
I think that's so important.
I was curious if then, after you had been through this experience, when you went back, in revisions and in other places in the book, how did your experience through this grief and this theology of suffering, like, how did that maybe change other things in the book?
Wow, that is a very perceptive question. I did a lot of work. I went back every, sentence. I asked myself, do I still believe this? And if I don't, is this because I'm just in this terrible situation and I will come back to this and I will recover from this? And I made a lot of phone calls. Like, my husband, again, being a pastor, we had a lot of pastor friends. And I probably need to apologize to a whole bunch of people for all my questions. Like, hi, do you have 20 minutes to talk to me? Okay, tell me why my husband died. Tell me what heaven is like. Tell me what he's doing right now. Like, what do you think? What do you think? What do you think? I did a lot of those kinds of conversations with people to try to sort through my stuff and my pain, and partly so that I could, you know, try to understand what was happening, and then have that help me look at the work and say, yeah, I can still say this. I can still stand here. I think we all have fences in our writing lives, probably, of things that we won't do. And so or write about. And so for me, again, married to a priest, you know, that was very much part of my calling too. And I always had a very simple way, kind of guardrail for my life as a pastor's wife, and it was do no harm. Do no
Yeah.
harm. I will not harm my husband's work. I will not, always say what I want to say. Or, I will do no harm. And so that probably has seeped into my writing life too. So I would think like if I had just gone full wound bleeding on the page, it wouldn't have helped anyone. It
Right.
certainly wouldn't have helped the book. And I knew that I was on a journey of hopefully recovery and healing. And you always live with grief. I have been told that, and I see that that is true. But yeah, so I just wanted to be really careful. And so I did interrogate the whole book again, and I did make some changes. There are some statements I changed into questions, but that's the kind of writer I am anyway. I am not an answer giver. I am a question asker, and so you know I'm pretty comfortable with that.
Yeah. What I love is I know this seems awful, but this was also a gift in terms of you had to go back and ask yourself those questions.
Yeah,
Not every believer faces that kind of a situation where they're forced to go back and say, do I still believe this in light of what's happening in my life? Do I still believe this? Do I still believe this?
yeah,
So I think that is one good thing that came out of that and can come out
I do.
for other people who are going through those kinds of issues.
Yeah.
Um,
One thing, really big thing I learned, and I'd spoken with a spiritual director for writers a couple of years ago, and she kind of set me up to think in this way. Is that because there was a time, like I think when I was writing The Minister's Wife, if I had a little fight with my son in the morning, I'd think, oh, there goes my writing day. Like I'm in a bad mood now. I can't write. And so my spiritual director for writers, like she had helped me dig into that a little bit and think about how that kind of compartmentalization cannot help us be writers. Everything does not have to be perfect for me to write. And that set me up well for believing, and a little bit of what we were talking about before, like anxiety, what do you have for me? Fear, what are you bringing to the table? I had to believe that my grief was then and is now uh, in there doing something that I will write
yeah.
out of, even if I don't write about it. And I think that's important for writers.
It's a thread. Everything that we are faced with, everything that we experience is a thread in the tapestry that God
Mm,
is weaving of our lives. And every single thread adds an element that we may not understand or see or appreciate until we see the completed tapestry. And we
yeah.
can look at that and we say, ah, okay, that's why that was there, because it needed to be there to complement this and to bring this out and to enhance this and to clarify things. I think when we face these difficult questions, do I still believe this? Is God who he says he is? Is God's goodness real? I've heard believers say, I'm starting to doubt the goodness of God. Um, I listen to those things. And I think because I don't have a theological mind. I have a simple mind, a simple faith of trust because I saw such a powerful example of that in both my parents.
Mhm.
And so I was raised with a sure knowledge that God is who he says he is. But when my husband and I were separated and I had been emotionally abused and all of those kinds of things, yeah, I had to acknowledge that I'd always thought that when I finally came face to face with God, I would run and leap up into his lap like a child, just grab him and hug him. And one very dark night, I was talking with him and I said, I don't think I know you well enough to jump into your lap. And I'm not sure that I trust you well enough to
Mhm.
do that because this was not the cruise I signed on for. But I'm not at the end of it, Don and I still work through things. We've been married this year will be 40, either 45 or 46. I'm not a math head.
Mm.
But as I look at it, I think to myself, I wouldn't have known God to the depth and the certainty that I know him now at 66 had I not gone through all of that. All of it,
Mhm.
every single thread needed to be there for me to be able to say with absolute certainty, God is who he says he is. And God is good, and all things do work together for our good as followers, because it's all about him. It's not about me. It's all about him and how I can reflect him. And that, when you're talking about working toward holiness, that self-examination, that coming to understand ourselves in light of who he is, it's vital.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we're coming to the end of our time here. Do you have any final words of wisdom you want to leave with our listeners?
I think, I'm struck, from what you just shared, Karen, about the work of finding meaning, and that we can find meaning without, getting into causation, for example.
Mhm.
So I can believe that I will find meaning that will show up in my writing out of what we've gone through as a family.
Mm.
And that doesn't mean that's why it happened. You
Right.
know what I mean? Like the two
Right,
things
right.
do not have to equal, but we will not waste it. And when my husband was dying, and after he died, throughout that time, I kept speaking with my children, who are young adults, because Brent could not communicate what he would have wanted to communicate, and I knew him so well. I knew what he would have wanted said, and I said those things. And one of them was, we have to honor what has happened here, this
Mhm.
terrible tragedy and pain, by not letting it go to waste. We have
Right.
to make this mean something, and that hopefully, make us more beautiful people, and more empathetic, and all of those things, and aware of the suffering of the world, and aware that God is with us in that he is with us. And that is a big faith thing to say,
Yes.
even that little thing. It sounds so little, but it's really big. So I guess I would encourage writers, whatever you are going through, we can be like hungry hounds for
Right.
material. Well, you are your greatest material. It doesn't mean you have
Right.
to write about yourself. Of course, we're not all going to do that. But you can, honor what is happening in your life by allowing it to become part of the garden of your writing. And I think that's a beautiful thing that artists do, whatever kind of artists we are. But writers are artists and makers, which reflect something of God's creative nature, of course. And so, yeah, don't build those walls inside yourself. Tear those walls down, and see what grows there. And I think that can be a beautiful thing.
Mm-hmm.
I love the imagery that you mentioned of it becoming a part of the garden of our lives, because there are times, I live in Washington State, in the northern part of Washington State, and right now we're seeing some blossoms in the garden, but it's still pretty barren. And
Yes.
during the winter with the cold and the snow, it's easy to look at it and to think, and I confess I thought it a few times, it'll never be beautiful again. And a garden has to die in order to come to life. It's the cycle that God has created, and in our own lives, some things have to die before He can bring it to the full, bright, fragrant bloom that He intends for us to be in Him, and that He intends us to see Him in all that beauty and in all the growth that comes from the death. So thank you so much for being with us, Karen. You have been a phenomenal blessing, and I just pray that God will continue to guide and to touch and be present for you.
Yes. Thank you, Karen.
Oh, thank you, Karen and Aaron. And thank you on behalf of writers everywhere who listen to this show, and the wonderful guests you bring on, and the way you minister. And again, that idea, what you said at the beginning, that you're chaplains to writers. Writers need chaplains. So
Yes.
I'm really thankful.
Thank you. Thanks for joining us today. You can find previous episodes and more resources at writefromthedeep.com.
And I bet you know someone who needs this podcast, so please share it with them.
So until next time,
Embrace the deep.
Your writing and your life will never be the same.